This is episode 125, where you'll be meeting the inspiring Kerry Jeffrey, a clinical hypnotherapist, counsellor and life coach working exclusively online, helping people around the world to resolve the really complex emotional issues that come from being diagnosed with and living with chronic illness. Building a business and life that blends contribution, fulfillment, and financial reward? Welcome to Your Next Chapter, the show for women in their 40s and beyond who are on this adventure. I'm Angela Rasmus, and I'm delighted you're here. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Your Next Chapter podcast. This is a part of the Under the Radar series where we're having conversations with ordinary, very much inverted commas there, women who are doing extraordinary things, who are creating businesses that have contribution at the heart and are also finding this very fulfilling. Now, of course, this is in preparation of the release of my book, Your Next Chapter, Ditch Your Doubt, Own Your Worth, and Build the Business You Really Want. And really what we're looking at here is, or having discussions about, is the different change cycles that so many of us move through, whether we decide to start a business or whether the one that we've got just doesn't fit us anymore because of the experiences that we've been having. And my guest today, Kerry Jeffrey, is a perfect example of this. Kerry's been in business for quite some time, but she describes herself as, I'm Kerry 3.0 at the moment because of the significant changes that have come up that have asked her to readjust and repivot her business so that she can serve the people who most need her. So Kerry, thank you so much for coming here and talking with us today.
Oh, thank you, Angela. I'm so excited about your book. I'm looking forward to getting an autographed copy. I think we'll have to organise that.
Absolutely. Hey, I'm a little bit excited too. It's been years, really years. You know what a book fiend I am, how much I adore them. And so the actual process of writing my own, it was tricky because I have such a high regard for books. And of course, you know, I put the measuring tape so high for me. So, but I've had to screw up my courage, jump through that hoop. And that is one of my own next chapters for sure.
That's a huge achievement.
Well, I know you have one coming out as well about toxic parents. So we'll be looking forward to talking about that one once it comes out into the world as well.
Fantastic.
So let's have a look back before we spring forward. Tell us about where you started in the business world and how that first change came about before we dig down into the latest one. So give us the cliff notes, my darling.
So I've always had this desire to help people with their emotional issues. I think I was born as a therapist, really. I was always the person everybody came to with their emotional issues or to talk through stuff or to get my advice. But, you know, life gets in the way and I had to leave school early and, you know, I didn't have the qualifications and along the way I became a single parent. So it was really about having to, you know, provide for myself and my son and do all of those things that life demands of you. And then in 2009, it was one of those pivotal years of my life that everything seemed to be coming together. So I was coming up to be 50 and my partner at the time had a massive stroke. I'd been bullied for the past 2 years at work by various members in the university department where I was on a good wage but under a tremendous amount of stress. And then my mother got cancer. And my ex-partner had a stroke and while we were on holiday. And so it was everything sort of seemed to coincide at once. But the interesting thing was that it was my first lesson in really putting myself and my needs first. Because when you're a single parent, I was back in that stage when my son was young because he's 32 now. The pension was nothing. The single parent pension was nothing. And so I was actually in poverty. And so it became that mindset of if you don't need it, you don't buy it. You know, that's it. And I had to justify that spending, you know, I had to justify every cent I spent on myself. But I would happily spend hundreds of dollars on my child or other people, which is a thing I think that so many us women do. You know, don't give ourselves permission even when we're earning the money. And so I took that attitude across to my working life. And even when I was on a really good wage, I couldn't justify spending money. And I'm a big fan of Louise Hay. Her book, You Can Heal Your Life, came along at a time in my life when I desperately needed it. And I was looking into, gosh, how can I find somebody to work with me to help me take these issues to an even deeper level? And there was nobody doing it, but I did find training in being a Heal Your Life facilitator, a group facilitator, but it was like about $5,000. And it was like, oh,
you feel the constriction.
I can't spend that amount of money on me. So I decided I was going to do it. And then at the last minute, I choked because I just couldn't justify spending that amount of money on me. Plus, it would mean going away because it was in residential training. So I would be away for a week in a different state. So I said no. And I really regretted it. It kept coming back to me. And then just before all of these other things had happened, the opportunity to do the training came up again. And so I bit the bullet and I committed to it and did it and was all paid for, all booked. Then my mother was diagnosed with cancer and she didn't have that long, to go. It was terminal, and it was like, well, we don't know how much time she's got left. And it was, do I go? Do I stay? Do I go? Do I stay? And I didn't know what to do. And so I actually spoke with a palliative care nurse, and she said, if you're going to go, now is the time to go, right? Your mother will still be here when you get back. And I spoke with my mother and she said, go, go, go. So I went, and as it happened, my mother passed away while I was still on the training, and I was in New South Wales because I'm in Melbourne. And I couldn't have got back in time for it. But it turned out that I was so surrounded by supportive, spiritual, soulful women who sort of held me and cried with me and did all of those things that I would not have had that experience of if I'd have stayed at home. If I'd have been at home, I would have been the one being strong for everybody else and holding everybody else together. And so it gave me that beautiful opportunity to be supported and held and looked after. And I was like in this vortex where I just felt so connected to my mother and to life. And I was almost on this high, which sounds weird. I'd done all my crying and all of that, but I just felt so profoundly connected to life and the universe and everything that I felt like I was in an altered state. And that was how I got through the funeral. And then from that, I thought, well, I know my mother always regretted not having children or getting married, but she said if I had the choice, I probably wouldn't have chosen that because I never got to see what I could be or what I could do or what I could achieve. And I'm stuck in this miserable job. I'm being bullied and I'm not doing what I felt my soul was requiring me to do. So I quit my job and had no plan, no nothing. Knew I'd been there long enough to get my long service leave. So I was sort of taking, a big, I guess, soul-filled, spiritual, long service leave, taking this massive leap of faith, trusting that the universe would catch me in some way. And so that's basically what started me on the path to working for myself.
Oh my goodness, I love that story, that recognition point that you had, that if you'd been at home, you would have had to have been the strong one. But because you weren't there, the universe had some other plans and gave you that experience of what it's like to surrender and to receive as opposed to give all the time. Such a turning point, but so much courage as well, Kerry. I mean, we often hear the expression, jump off the cliff, you'll grow your wings on the way down. And we hear, in theory, that sounds, yep, okay, I'll give it a go. But I don't hear that often people who actually do it. I know the beautiful thing was you also had a wee safety net there in terms of that long service leave. But I think more importantly, you'd had that experience of what it's like to have such a strong emotional support system. I guess that's where the kernel of desire to actually start creating that for other people turned up.
For sure. It definitely did. And it felt like I was getting more aligned with what I wanted to do. Like as a single mother, I did have the opportunity to go back and finish my VCE, as it was called then. And then I got into university and Then I got my undergraduate degree in psychology. So at least I had something like that behind me. But it was my first experience of that trust yourself and trust life, that you will be looked after. Like, good things will happen for you. It was really the opening of that whole thing that sort of got me to Kerry 3.0, where I am now.
I love that, Kerry, the 3.0. I love that. So that idea of trust, and if we come back to the concept, because I think a lot of people can relate to this. You found something that was calling you, either doing the training with as a You Can Heal Your Life coach, but then like I'd use the expression in New Zealand, we chickened out at the last moment. It seemed too big, but it never went away. That desire never went away. And I think that that's what we often experience. Something keeps tapping at us, keeps tapping at us, keeps tapping at us. And eventually we need to turn around and look at it and respond to it. And that's exactly what you do. I've found so often, I use the expression, next chapter businesses are often built on skinned knees. So it's our own experiences that actually make us realize that we can shorten and sweeten the journey for others. We can turn around and help. And I know that you started off in that therapist role, but then something happened that changed direction for you. Would you like to talk a little about that?
Yeah. So 6 years ago, I got what I thought was a really, really bad flu, and I was getting increasingly worse and worse and worse, to the point that I was sitting on the couch one day and I actually fell over sideways because I couldn't hold my body up.
Right.
And it turned out that I had Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is an autoimmune condition of the thyroid. Well, it's actually an autoimmune disease. It's not a thyroid disease. So my autoimmune system had gone haywire and had been attacking my thyroid to the point where it destroyed so much of my thyroid tissue that I wasn't getting any thyroid hormones in my body. And every cell in our body has a receptor for the thyroid hormone T3. That's like how essential it is. So I was at that stage physically and cognitively disabled. So I had no idea what was going to happen. My doctor then said, here's your tablet, go and get another blood test in 6 weeks' time and adapt to your new normal. And here I am, in my mid-50s. I can't work. I can barely stand up. I can't, I've got no idea if I'm going to get better or not. And the doctor had given me all the help that he apparently could, which was, well, just get used to it, like just deal with it. This is how you are now. And I didn't know if I was going to live or die, and I didn't know if I was ever going to be able to support myself again. So there began, Kerry 2.0. Then that was the start of that new life. And I was in brain fog, so I had cognitive disability as well. So I could barely think or barely speak or barely function, but all the mental function that I had went into looking for some way to help myself, because I just knew intuitively that, your body doesn't just suddenly do this. Something must have caused this or contributed to this. And if something is done, then it should be able to be undone or reversed or helped, because our bodies heal. That's all they are made to do, is they're constantly healing and replacing different parts. Our whole body pretty much replaces itself, I think, every 18 months. So that was what I did. And so I changed everything about my life. I changed my diet. I changed how I managed stress. I changed my mindset. I found a doctor who would work with me. I went on a thyroid replacement that is not well known here in Australia, which is called natural desiccated thyroid, which is actually the thyroid gland of a pig, which is comes over from America. You get it in compounding chemists, and it gives me basically all of the thyroid hormones that my own thyroid would give me if it was working properly. And along the way, I found out later that I also had celiac disease, and I'd been previously diagnosed with an autoimmune condition called antiphospholipid syndrome about 17 years prior, when I had a couple of miscarriages when I was trying to conceive my youngest son. So it was a massive learning experience of just finding people who had been able to take back control of their lives and take back control of their health by changing their environment, changing their diet, changing their emotional state, their their attitude towards life, and everything. So basically I reinvented myself, and I was back in a position where I hadn't been able to work for 12 months. So my therapy business had ground to a halt, and I was basically starting again from scratch, which was a very difficult thing, and starting again with now chronically ill and having to manage all the different changes that go with that.
I hope you're enjoying this conversation, and perhaps it's inspiring you to start your own next chapter. Don't forget to pop over to my website where you can order a copy of my book, Your Next Chapter, Ditch Your Doubt, Own Your Worth, and Build the Business You Really Want. In it, I'll take you through the next chapter change cycle that will help you develop the clarity and confidence to move into this next stage of your business and life. Just go to angelarasmus.com/Your Next Chapter book. There's one heck of a lot of demands that are sitting on your plate. I mean, let's just contrast them. Number one is that we're needing to find those solutions for ourselves. And I think a lot of your trust came in there as well. Like you trusted that there was things out there that were going to change this for you. You didn't settle for that original, well, you're going to have to just learn to live with it. Good luck with that. And so that journey to find your own solutions was so important. But I can also hear that in there was the need to then pick up and get on with business as well, because you had to be your own white knight, I guess, in that scenario. So it's hard for a lot of people who'd be listening right now to think, how could you do both? I mean, that's a huge demand on any woman. But I've known you for a while now. You're not just any woman. There's an enormous depth and tenacity and persistence and energy that always sits there with you, which I've always observed over the years that we've known one another. So when you then made this, I guess, recognition, or had this recognition of how important the emotional side was in helping people who are faced with, in this case, being diagnosed with a chronic illness. So that concept of the emotional resilience, how important do you feel that is across the board?
Oh, it's huge. It is absolutely huge, because that was what I was looking for. Like, I'm here in my mid-50s, single, still a single parent, the only wage earner, and being told, well, this is your new normal and you can't even function. Like, my worst case scenario solution would be that I would have to give up the rental property we're in. My youngest son would go and live with his father. My eldest son would move out, and I would have to go and live with my father, my own father, who's in his 80s. And that, while that was the if nothing else works plan, like, that is not how I wanted to live my life, and I didn't know how I was going to live. And just to come to terms with it, I think one of the things about chronic illness people don't understand, because our model of illness is basically you get sick and you get better, or you get sick and you die. So people's understanding of chronic illness, which means that it goes on, it continues. It is incurable at the moment. There is no cure for autoimmune conditions. Many of them are progressive, which means over time they get worse. And people get sick of you being sick, basically, and they keep waiting for you to get well. And in most cases, like myself, I don't look sick. I look very healthy, and I am a very healthy chronically ill person. So you don't get that support, you don't get the understanding from the medical community, because there's so little they can do for it anyway. Many of us get gaslighted, told it's all in our head, given prescriptions for antidepressants, sent to psychologists for a referral, hypochondriacs, all of those different sorts of things. So I was desperately looking for, how do I emotionally adapt to my whole life? Like, who I was gone, and I was never going to be that woman again. So it wasn't just what was in the present. The future I believed I was going to have was gone, and I didn't know what was going to happen. So everything was uncertain, to the point that I didn't know what I was going to feel like from day to day, or hour to hour, or minute to minute, or if I could work that day, or what was going to happen to me. So everything suddenly became uncertain, and I lost myself. And there was nothing out there, Angela. There was nothing out there for the emotional side. It was all about the diseases, here's the biology of it, here's the etiology, here's the progression. But there was nobody talking about how do you make that mental mindset, what can you do to help yourself get that mindset to get out of the grief and out of the anxiety and start helping yourself. So in a sense, I guess I've become the person I was looking for.
Yeah, you became your own heroine.
Yeah.
Heroine. Maybe I'm not pronouncing that quite right, but you know what I mean. And now seeing the community that you have amassed around you, it's obvious that you have hit on a need and you've opened yourself in such a way that people feel that they can connect to the journey that you've had. And I think this is such an important part of Next Chapter businesses, is the openness with which we are willing, or I don't want to say the word need, but the openness which is helpful in terms of having other people connect with us because of that recognition that you've walked the path that I'm walking, and the idea of just being a few steps ahead so that we can turn around and help those that are walking up the same path is the most important thing. I think there's a key here is I've found a lot of women get trapped in the idea that they have to be an expert, inverted commas, and sometimes that need for an expert status can paralyze and procrastinate and all the rest. And you've spoken about you almost had to really forge the path as a trailblazer because there wasn't anybody else who was doing this stuff. Do you think that was actually an advantage in some ways because you didn't fall into comparison? What was your experience there?
It actually has been an advantage because when I first got into university, my plan was to become a psychologist. And the further I got with my degree, the more I thought, this is not what I thought it would be. And it was such an old boys club. And it was so bound by rigid rules and theories and, putting people in boxes. And that was my perception of it anyway. And the goalpost just kept moving the further and further it went. And it was like, well, there was nothing to stand out. And even when I went on and did my hypnotherapy training and added my other modalities, life coaching and all of that, what they talked about was finding your niche, but it felt like every niche was filled. And how do you stand out when people are looking for a life coach or people are looking for a hypnotherapist or people are just looking for a counselor? And so the process of becoming who I am now and the work I do now was very gradual. And it's only been recently that I've realized that, you know what, this is uncharted territory. Nobody's doing this. Nobody's really talking about this, which means that, and I'm experiencing it because I've got that lived experience of my life. Like, I am the expert on me.
Yes.
And that's always what I say. I am not the expert on you. I'm the expert on me. I have this body of knowledge, but every single thing that I use and that I teach and that I work with my clients are all tried and tested things that I have used that have made the difference to my life and the quality of life and how I manage now as 3.0 with this new diagnosis that I've got and the health crisis that I went through. So that's been a fairly recent thing for me, Ange, is to think, well, you know what? I can be the expert, but there is still, I think, in all of us that bit of imposter syndrome where you're waiting for someone to tap you on the shoulder and say, who are you to be positing these ideas and theories, and you don't know what you're talking about and you're not an expert and all that sort of stuff. So, but I'm getting much better at just saying, shut up. To all that.
Oh, that voice is, I think, is one of the things that holds so many of us back. We're sort of, looking over our shoulder as we walk along. And even if we're not suffering from that imposter syndrome, we do it to ourselves. We do it to ourselves so much in terms of the way that we talk to ourselves or the way that we don't acknowledge or we brush off what we've actually achieved. My experience has been that the older and wiser we become, now that I've hit these roaring 50s, is that our sense of self-worth is the most important strategy that we can actually embark on. The concept of reconnecting, because I believe we're all born with self-worth. We all feel utterly worthy. You know, look at the average 2-year-old who's owning the room. They haven't got, crisis of confidence. You know, I fell down. I wonder if I'll ever be able to get up again. You know, I'm being a bit facetious here, obviously. But over time, you know, the trials of life, competition, comparison, the conditioning that we're under that says that we need to be a certain way to be acknowledged or to be, you know, heralded, we start to disconnect from that sense of self-worth. But it sounds as though, and what I've heard and seen so often is that as we get older, we start to reconnect to it. We start to let go of that, well, what do other people think? It recedes. You may still hear the whispers of it, but we're no longer quite so afraid that someone's going to leap out, you know, and like candid camera, here's the woman who's been the imposter in her business for the last 12 years. I mean, it's not going to happen. There is that increasing sense of recognizing the value that we have to contribute. And it's so important that we recognize that. Think of all the people who are in your world now and who are feeling that same sense of relief that you had when you started to discover these solutions. Imagine if you'd never got started. Where would they be? Still roaming around in the wilderness.
And it's interesting to see other people's perception of you, because from my perspective, I'm doing what I'm doing. Like I'm just doing what I do, and I'm being me.
I'm being Kerry.
I'm putting it out there. I'm being Kerry. And I am being Kerry in a much more open way. And that's been a process of realizing that the people that I most connect to are people who are willing to be vulnerable, because that was always something I was terrified of, is you know, being vulnerable to me equated opening myself up to attack or ridicule or bullying, because I experienced lots of bullying when I was young because of my weight. So it's trying to strike that balance between letting in all of the good stuff you're given. Like, I have a fantastic community of people, and they're very appreciative, and I get daily people telling me that you're my inspiration, or you're so wonderful, or all of this. And there's part of me sitting there going, what? Really? What? Why? And trying to let it in without getting overwhelmed by it, because I'll have moments sometimes sitting there in a discovery session with somebody who's in a tremendous amount of emotional pain, that's been through horrendous traumatic experiences, and thinking, oh my God, who am I to think I can help this person? Like, what if I can't help them? And it's the doubt that kills. Like, it's the doubt and the fear that stops us in our tracks. And what I've found is the more I trust myself, the better it gets. But it's always a process. It's that new level, new devil. You'll come up with a new situation where, okay, I'm going to talk about something that's a bit out there that I've never spoken about before, or I'm going to set this boundary, or I'm going to deal with this particular client, and just trust that I am enough, and I'm not the one doing it. I don't heal anybody. I don't fix anybody. I facilitate and I support and I provide a structure and I give them tools and things like that. But ultimately, they are responsible for their own healing.
Yeah,
and they've got to be willing to change. So it's that interesting process, and I think I'm going through that process now of really letting the good things that come back to me land and letting them in and letting myself feel them. And that's like a fairly recent process, probably in the last 9 months or so.
Because we're ever growing. We are ever growing. And that allowing and that trusting process you're talking about does allow us to peel off another layer and find another bit more depth, a bit more depth, a bit more depth. The experience that you're talking about there, that feeling of who am I when you're in the moment, I've heard that and experienced that. And I had some wonderful advice or insight from one of my own mentors. This is probably going back about 12, 18 months ago. And it really changed things for me, because I was under this impression that I was responsible for the outcomes of my clients. Like, if things didn't, go fabulously, obviously it's all my fault. I was the one that was helping them. So if it didn't work, then, woe me, woe betide. And what she said to me was that you are responsible. And what that means is that you are able to respond in the moment to what's in front of you, to what the client needs, to what the person needs. It doesn't mean that you are responsible for them implementing and carrying on with their world. And I went, whoa, okay, I'm responsible in the moment. I can do that. I can listen. I can be fully present. I can give with an open heart. I can, do my best. But then I have to let go. Then I have to let go. And the other piece that came up was, it's something I talk about in the book, which is GOSCOP, which you've probably heard me talk about in the masterminds a couple of times, my friend, which is get off self, get on purpose. So often when we have that crisis of confidence, it's because we are looking inwards, and it's all about us, and you can feel yourself restricting and fearful. And when we can pause, recognize it, you catch and detach from that sensation. You recognize what's going on, the old story of, oh my God, am I going to get it right? And breathe and focus back on the person and the purpose. And then you start to open up again. And it doesn't matter what sort of business that you have, anything across the board, we all are going to have those crisis of confidence moments. And if we can GOSCOP and catch and detach, then we can keep on moving forward.
And it is that constant process of being aware of what the story you're telling yourself is, and how that's impacting on you. And you've got to stop that and turn that around. And it's interesting, just before we met up, I had a telephone consult with an endocrinologist from the hospital because, as you know, Angela, I've been recently diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, adult onset. And I've had some difficult experiences in the hospital. And I didn't know what it was about. I didn't know what the agenda was. And she got very angry with me for something that she didn't think I should have done. And having somebody who's young enough to be my daughter telling me off is not a very pleasant experience. And two, I'm like everybody else. I like everybody to like me. And so I've just been going through this process of managing that whole experience. At the end of the day, it's not important. She's not important in my life. Her opinion of me is irrelevant. It's what I think and what I feel, and getting back into my business and aligning with my goals and my beliefs, because I know that I am the only person ultimately who's responsible for my health. I'm the only one that's got my back, and those decisions are always going to be mine. So it's that constant ongoing sort of massage, isn't it? That process of you're trundling along well, and then something comes up and hits you, and you've got to, okay, that hit a nerve, that hit a vulnerability, that hit a fear that I've got. And it's really about going back and looking at that, isn't it? And getting yourself back to where you want to be, back on purpose.
And that's why the emotional tools are so incredibly important. I mean, there's so many that you bring to your clients that are a result of, as you said, your own lived experiences. There's so many that I bring into my work because of the result of my own lived experiences. I mean, there's so many tools and approaches that we can learn about business building, and they're important. They're skills to develop as well, but nothing will ever stick if we don't have those that ability to connect back to what's true for us, to manage our emotional landscape, because there's days when I get hit sideways by things that I wasn't expecting, and if I didn't have the tools, I could stay down for a long time. And that doesn't serve me, that doesn't serve my clients, that doesn't serve the purpose I'm here for, all of those things. So that's why I have such a respect and a fascination for the work that you do, because those emotional tools are absolute lifesavers in more ways than one.
Oh, they are. And I think people underestimate, they might look at you and think, oh, Angela's so organised and she does this and she can do that and life is easy for her. Or they'll look at me and say, oh, yes, Kerry, well, that's all right for you. You're different than me. You're just stronger, like it's some random event that happened. They don't see the constant work that we have to do, right? You've got to keep picking up those tools, because anybody can change when it's easy. Right? That when it's tough, like when you're really sick or when you're in a crisis or when you've had some big smack in your confidence or something like that, what we tend to do is sit back and kick ourselves when we're down. But if you take those tools and you start building yourself up and you start trusting yourself and you start having lots of compassion for yourself and support for yourself, that's where the pivot happens. But sometimes you've got to do a lot of work, because there's something very attractive in going down into that negative space. And I think we all need to do it sometimes. We've all got to have a pity party and feel the feelings, because it's not about, let's be positive all the time. All feelings are valid. But you've still got to do that work, and it is work. But the more you use those tools, the easier they get to use, the more habitual they become. And you do reach a point where it does become just part of how you live and operate and think about life.
Absolutely. It's something that I describe in the book as the bounce up factor. You get to this point where, lots of things can hit you, and absolutely, you're not bulletproof. You need to feel them and acknowledge them, but you've got the tools to bounce back up again. You can't be held down anymore. So those are some of the most important lessons I've had in my life, and no doubt the ones that you share with your people as well. Well, Kerry, it's been a delight, as always, to deepen a conversation with you, and to really hear those ups and downs, and the tenacity and the commitment is what I'm hearing. It's a commitment to your own development, but it's also a commitment to sharing what you have experienced very openly and vulnerably, so that other people can walk in those shoes as well. So it was very generous of you to share your story here. Is there any, if you're imagining that there's a woman listening to you now going, can I do this? Can I do this? I've got this feeling. What would you say to her?
Trust yourself. You absolutely can. I really believe there's only two key emotions in the whole universe, and that is love and fear. And I have on my wall in big letters, choose love, always choose love, because fear constricts. And trust yourself and trust life. There's been just so many times when I've leaped and I might have not have landed where I thought I was going to land, but it's always been in a better place for me.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you again, my darling. I look forward to us talking another time.
Thanks so much, Angela.
And for you, my lovely listener, I hope that you have found the messages that you've heard here today on this discussion with Kerry and I inspiring enough for you to expand out of fear, which may be contracting you and may be stopping you from expanding into love and doing that thing that is calling you. Just how Kerry was called back to that very first point of transformation for her when she went for that training about Louise Hay. Now, I'd encourage you to go and have a look at the work that Kerry is doing in the world. You'll find her at www.emotionalautoimmunity.com. So you can lean into that emotional support, even if you aren't suffering from a chronic illness yourself, but to just get that feeling of vulnerability and openness and trust and sharing that is such a part of Kerry's vision and her steps forward as an entrepreneur. And hopefully that will provide just that extra little bit of sauce on top that encourage you, if not to start a business, perhaps to change the one that you already have, so it's more reflective of the woman that you are becoming. So thank you for spending your time here with us today on the podcast. Until we have another episode, take very good care. I will talk to you again soon. Thanks so much for listening to the Your Next Chapter podcast. I really do appreciate your time. And if you'd like to connect with me, you can find me on Facebook or LinkedIn. And of course, my website, angelarasmus.com. If you enjoy the show, I'd love you to share it with another woman who's in the midst of business and life beyond 40. And if you love it, a review on iTunes or whatever app you listen in on would be fabulous. Reviews somehow impact that deeply mysterious algorithm and make it easier for the show to be found, which is always a good thing. So thanks again, and until next time, take care.